Welcome, everyone. Tonight's session will be presented by Ms. Nani Liam. Ms. Liam is presently a UNISERV director from Washington State, and she's also a former participant in the NEA Organizing Fellowship Academy and a participant in the NEA ESP Leadership Institute. Ms. Liam has 12 years of experience as an ESP, working in a multi-level schools division, supporting students with diagnosis of autism, and she's also supported students in the middle school setting, early childhood development, and adult transition programs for ages 18 through 21. In the final years before becoming a UNISERV director, she worked as an ESP as a campus supervisor in the security position at an 1,800 plus student high school. Tonight, Ms. Liam will speak to us about equitable discipline and the role that we play in the process. And so the next voice we'll hear is Ms. Liam. She prepares for her presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad all of you could join us from around the United States to be a part of this conversation. I'm pretty passionate about it, and so I'm glad you all can be here. I am very well aware that this conversation is something that will take longer than an hour. So we're going to skim over some of these topics and give you some, start planting some seeds for you to go into deeper conversations at later times with your peers or with your locals. So let's get underway. In all of the presentations that I do across the United States, and when I do them here in the state of Washington, I always start my presentations with Courageous Conversations Protocol. These come from Glenn Singleton. He's the founder and president of Courageous Conversations, the organization, and he's the author of Courageous Conversations Around Race. What's important to you and to me when we present this material, it's having this level of awareness and putting us all in the same conversation to set the platform for what we're going to talk about tonight. So it's important to me that you stay engaged, that when I ask questions or when things come up in terms of surveys or things in the chat, that you speak your truth. Realize we're not going to fix anyone here tonight in 45 minutes to an hour. You may experience some discomfort. You may be like, I don't even understand what's physically happening in my body as we have this conversation, and that's okay. We need to expect and accept that there's not going to be there'll be some non-closure tonight. We won't be able to address all of the answers, but we will be able to give you the tools and address them in a timely fashion. We need to listen for understanding, be accepting of difference, be respectful, have an open mind as I share this information with you. Understand your intent, and then own your impact. So next slide. The agenda tonight is going to start out with the groundwork of understanding of terms. There's a lot of terms that we as ESPs, oftentimes some of our buildings and our teaching communities don't take the time to explain to us or to go deeper on. So I want to make sure that we all understand some of this common terminology around discipline. We're going to learn a little bit about how authentic relationships can impact a student's success, their resiliency, and their opportunity to hope and dream. We're going to explore how personal bias impacts disciplinary decisions and actions, and then think about considering next steps for the realm of influence and you within your role in your educational communities. Here's the word, discipline. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? And so to start us off, we have a poll. And when you see the poll come up on your screen, we're going to have you answer, how does it make you feel when you hear the word discipline? So we're going to give you a couple seconds for everybody to pop in the answers, and then we're going to see some results. Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel upset? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Or does the topic or the word discipline just kind of confuse you? So when we look at the results here, a lot of people, it makes you feel uncomfortable, right? Nobody likes to hear that word, right? Some people it feels good, some people it makes them feel upset, and 10% of us are confused. So that's pretty much, excuse me, that's very average to say it makes people uncomfortable when they hear that word discipline. So we have a second poll that's about to come up, and this second poll is just kind of give us a little feel of the room, a feel of the participants here tonight. And that is, what do you think discipline is? Is it needed? Is it unnecessary? Is it misunderstood? Or is it confusing itself? So let's give you guys a couple seconds to be able to click in and give us some feedback on how you feel about what discipline is. 47% of you, almost half of you, feel like it's needed. Some people say it's misunderstood, and some people say it's confusing. And I agree with all of those answers. So thank you all for engaging and interacting. I think when we think of that word discipline, it's really important for us to understand that the word discipline originates from the Latin word for pupil, which is discipulus. I'm getting really heady on all of this, but it's also the source of the word disciple, which means to teach. And so many of us, when we hear that word discipline, we think of the punitive side of it. But if we really break it down to the origin and the original intent of the word, it's to teach. And that's why, for me, understanding the definition of pieces is important going forward. Okay, so next slide. Jessica talked earlier about how after this training is over, you have the ability to receive handouts. And so I'm going to go through some of these discipline terms, and some of the things that are on that handout are actually the definitions of these discipline terms. But these are kind of 5 basic discipline terms that we hear across the United States around the terminology of discipline in our schools. And the first one I want to touch on is PBIS, which we love to use abbreviations in education, and then we forget to explain it to other people. But PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Intervention Support. And if a district utilizes this program effectively, it actually takes about 5 to 7 years to set it up properly. It usually is utilized to promote school safety and to promote good behavior. The focus on it is front loading, right? It's on prevention, not punishment. And there's 3 tiers of support that are intended to meet students where they're at. And so we accelerate from levels 1 to level 2 to level 3 behaviors. Level 3 being some of the more challenging behaviors that you would see from a student on a campus. A little side note about PBIS is districts need to do front work regarding implicit bias and understanding the racial, social, and economic justice piece of their staff before they can implement this properly and effectively for the students. So that's what they're seeing across the United States, that is districts that have had the most success with PBIS work have done that work prior to implementing PBIS. And then we come to the term restorative justice. It's the theory of justice that emphasizes repairing the harm that is caused from behaviors. And there's 3 big ideas in restorative justice of repairing, encounter, and transforming. And so if restorative justice is done to its true definition, the first piece, repair, is understanding that there was a behavior that caused harm, and justice requires repairing that harm, meaning holding a student accountability for that behavior. And then the second piece of restorative justice is the encounter. And so the parties decide together how to repair. When I say the parties, I'm talking about the people that were affected by the behavior. And for it to be done to its truest form, it's that encounter, or that deciding how to repair, is done face to face. It's done ideally at a table that's in circular shape. And there is a mediator present, mediating the conversation and mediating all of the sides involved to a decision. And then the last piece of restorative justice is to transform. So this can cause fundamental change in people. If restorative justice is done properly, you'll see changes in people, you can see changes in relationships, and you can see changes in community. If restorative justice is done effectively, you can oftentimes change the educational directive of a student, and you can see them have be seen, be understood, and become a part of the community in a more valued fashion. The next terminology you hear often in the realm of discipline is this preschool to prison pipeline. Sometimes it's titled cradle to prison pipeline or schoolhouse to jailhouse tract. And what it does is it refers to school discipline policies and practices that are removing students from their learning opportunities. So that's when we see suspensions where students are removed from school as a whole and they're doing at-home suspensions or expulsions. Preschool to prison pipeline ties into where students get pushed out of school into juvenile and criminal justice systems. It starts out as a minor offense like vaping or dress code or cell phone use on a campus. And then they just continues to escalate and kind of snowball effect. Research and data indicates that BIPOC students, and when I say BIPOC, I want to give you that understanding that it's for, I mean, Black, Indigenous people of color, those students in which we work with, and students with disabilities, both physical and neurodivergent, they're disproportionately affected by zero tolerance discipline, which ties into preschool to prison pipeline. So zero tolerance discipline refers to school discipline policies and practices that mandate predetermined consequences. If A happens, then B is the result or the punishment that ties into the A behavior. Usually they're punitive, usually they're exclusionary, and sometimes they can be severe as well. Last piece is discretionary discipline. It's utilized by educators and administrators on the daily. So it allows people in authority the discretion to use disciplinary tools as they see fit. The legitimate concern around discretionary discipline is that their power can have negative consequences. Their implicit bias can have negative consequences. And so it emphasizes why districts need to make the equity work their foundation, in which all work and all decisions and all policies and practices stand upon. Next slide. That was a lot of information, my friends. So now in the chat, I would like for you to type in, what do you think your role is in discipline in your positions? What's your role? So I'm seeing Rosalie said she's guiding. Kathy says she's supporting. Rudy follows the behavior plan. Melissa's building rapport with her kids. Stephen's supporting. Stephanie's assisting students. Maury is redirecting. Regina has prevention and redirection. Mia is supporting, advising. Marlene is implementing, and Jenny's connecting before correcting. Stephanie, understanding how to support. Great. So lots of different pieces. And you know, when we say ESPs, and we are such a broad spectrum of people, right? We are bus drivers, we're kitchen staff, we're office support women and men. We are people that are one-on-ones with students. We're pushing into mainstream classrooms and supporting students. And so we all have various different roles, and sometimes people, somebody said appealing to rationale. I love that. We all have different pieces. And so sometimes as an ESP, we question like, I don't even know what my role is in discipline, right? So let's go to our next slide. So this video that I'm about to play for you, the title is Stupid School Security and Discipline Policies. I come from the realm of security, so I want you to know that that's not what we're saying. She is a rhetorist. This woman's name is Jenny Young, and she's all about the words that are used when it comes to working with students. And she has this kind of mindset about radically reimagining what we do with students and how the words we use with our students can deeply affect how they are in our school buildings. Now, I want you to know the lens in which she comes from is she was a teacher at an alternative high school, and she is a rhetorist, so she's all about how words are done. So we're going to watch this video and listen to what she has to say, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion afterwards. So we can go ahead and play it.
I'm not an educational theorist or a social scientist. I'm a rhetorician. I study rhetoric, which we can define as the power and effect of language, and sometimes of images too. I started thinking that if connection could be forged through language, then maybe that's where the disconnects are. Maybe we're not talking to kids the right way. I thought maybe if we could change the rhetoric, we could change everything. But how do you change rhetoric? Well, first you have to understand the rhetoric you already have. So when you're looking at the rhetoric of an institution, and when you're studying it, you want to start by looking at the things that are said most frequently. That's what I heard most frequently from my students. This place is a prison. Even the good kids said it. We call that a metaphor, and it's a metaphor that's become a refrain in American high schools, especially the high security, high surveillance high schools that are now the norm in most communities. So students complain about their high schools feeling like prisons, but high schoolers complain a lot, and they have a lot of feelings. But this metaphor, it turns out, really holds up. It's supported linguistically, procedurally, and visually. So this place is a prison is a metaphor, just like he's a real bear in the morning is a metaphor. But we need to talk about a different kind of metaphor now, a more sophisticated kind. It's a kind of metaphor that affects every single one of you every day, but you're not aware of it because it's subconscious, and that's what makes it so powerful. It's something that cognitive linguists call a primary metaphor. I want to share an example with you of a primary metaphor for love. We call it love is magic, and this is how we talk about it. She cast her spell over me. The magic is gone. I was spellbound. She had me hypnotized. I was entranced by him. I was completely charmed. She is bewitching. Here's an alternate primary metaphor for love. We call this one, love is a medical patient. And this is how we talk about it. This is a sick relationship. They have a strong and healthy marriage. The marriage is dead. It can't be revived. Their marriage is on the mend. We're getting back on our feet. Their relationship is in really good shape. The language used reveals the primary metaphor that is operating. And these primary metaphors, they operate constantly beneath the surface of our lives without us even being aware that they exist, and they direct our behavior. For example, if I think of love as magic, then it seems completely beyond my control. It sort of exists at the whims of the universe, and when it's gone, poof. But if I think of love as a medical patient, then I suddenly have agency. I'm inspired to take good care of it and to actively heal it when it falters. So let's look at how the primary metaphor, school is prison, is supported, not only by language, but also by procedures and even by architecture in this case. So remember that the language used reveals the metaphor that is operating. This is language taken from a high school discipline policy, and it's very typical. You don't even have to read the whole policy, just look at the words in red. Right of appeal, subject to verification, charged, suspect the presence of contraband, reasonable cause, early release. These are not teaching terms. These are law enforcement terms. This is a picture of a high school security drill. The picture was featured in large format on the front page of a local newspaper the week before school started. Welcome to high school. And if today's high schools resemble prisons, that's not a coincidence. This is a floor plan of a typical contemporary American high school. You can see that it features a long central hallway, 1/3 of a mile in this case, and it's separated by multiple sets of doors. Those doors can be shut down sequentially from a remote location in order to stop an active shooter running down the hall. We actually design schools for active shooters. The principle is called CPTED, and it stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. It's the same set of design standards we use for prisons. Another thing I looked at when I was trying to get a handle on the rhetoric operating in American high schools was a collection of high school handbooks, this spiral-bound documents that are issued to students at the beginning of each year. So I took a bunch of these handbooks and I coded every word in every handbook into one of 3 categories. The handbooks average 24,000 to 25,000 words per handbook, so they're not insignificant documents. And these were the 3 categories that emerged. The first I called informative language. This is neutral information like bell schedules or how to drop her out of class. The second I called guiding language. This is positive language that expresses an interest in or a concern for students. It encourages them to get involved in activities. It assures them that help and support is available if they need it. The third category I called warning or punitive language, and that sounds like don't do this, or if you do this, then this will happen. And these were the results of that study. The increase between the amount of language we use to positively guide students and the amount we use to threaten them is 2,600%. That's a rhetorical problem. That's a problem with how we're talking to students. Now, I need to make one important disclaimer about all these rules and restrictions. The severest of them were implemented as a response to the Columbine shooting and to other incidents of school violence since the late 1990s. They're a completely well-intentioned response to fear. The problem is that these measures do not work to keep students safe. I'm suggesting we ditch almost all of them. And I understand that's frightening, and the logistics of doing that is an entirely different talk. But I want to make one point about it, and it's a really important point, and this is the point. The deadliest acts of school violence in history have occurred in the most secure school buildings in history. What we're doing in the name of safety is not only super expensive, it's super ineffective. And there's a lot of reason to believe that all these security measures actually make schools more dangerous because of the toxic environments they create. There's currently a groundswell of recognition that we need change, but the conversations we're having right now aim to make schools a little less prison-like. Maybe we don't need armed guards. Maybe we don't need metal detectors. Maybe we don't need to give teachers guns. And while I agree with all those things, I'm not really interested in those conversations because I think we need radical change. I think we need to stop tweaking the system and start radically reimagining the American high school. And one way to do that is through metaphor. The good news is that we don't have to keep this prison primary metaphor that we currently have. We know that we can change our world by intentionally changing the metaphors that structure it. We can pick a new metaphor. So let's try this one. So what you do is, once you've picked a metaphor, you ask yourself whether your language and policies are consistent with that metaphor. Right now, our language and policies really are consistent with the prison metaphor. But let's try this with a garden metaphor. So I brought this little garden with me. Okay, so notice that I'm holding this garden very carefully rather than like trying to scare it into acting right. Notice that it has no walls, so making rules about being inside or outside of it doesn't make any sense. Notice that each plant looks different, and that's what makes the garden beautiful. So making rules about how the plants look doesn't make any sense. And this plant might need something different than this plant, and it might bloom sooner or later or not at all, and that's fine. Giving the plants a bunch of standardized tests doesn't make any sense because we know that they're inherently different. This garden won't survive without constant nurturing, but it also won't thrive in a sterile, overly controlled environment. It needs the storms, it needs the wind and the rain and the temperature fluctuations as much as it needs the sunshine. In fact, locking it down in an effort to protect it from every conceivable thing that could ever harm it will actually kill it. Think about that in terms of the American high school. Now, I understand how this looks. I'm a liberal academic suggesting not only that we turn high schools into gardens, but that we can save the teenagers with metaphors. And you're probably afraid I'm going to walk off this carpet and go right back to smoking weed. And I realize that the whole idea of redesigning high school with metaphors is weird. But that's only because it's new. It's not as weird as making 25 rules about ID tags. And it's not as weird as a bunch of adults sitting around a table writing dress codes specifically designed to conceal teenage girls' breasts. That's messed up.
I was muted, sorry. So I share that video with you to have a deeper understanding that the connection over words can be the difference between educating a student and losing a student. How we discipline a student can be the difference between a student still feeling safe on a campus, still feeling seen and wanting to engage in their education, and a student just turning off. So, which brings us to the question, like, what can we do as ESPs? So things to ponder for you is, where is my influence? If you are a bus driver and you know every Thursday, Timmy's dad brings him to the bus stop because his parents are separated. And every Thursday, Timmy's hair is messed up. He's wearing the outfit he had on Wednesday, and he's always hungry. You get to have the ability when you drop Timmy off at school to grab somebody that you see, a staff person, and say, can you make sure Timmy gets breakfast? Because you remember the last time Timmy came on a Thursday, he was hungry, he wasn't paying attention, he acted out, he got in trouble, and you didn't get to drive him home because his parents had to come pick him up at school because of other aspects of his life. So our influence at times can be preventative, right? Seeing our students where they're at. Things you can also consider is how do you contribute to those student relationships? Where do you get to have those interactions? And where can you bring about change? One of the things I hear at the national level from ESPs is, I'll see a behavior and then I never know the results of that behavior. And sometimes it's a little bit of check yourself, like, why do you want to know the result of the behavior? And if you just genuinely want to know and are considering, what are the tiers within your school for you to be able to ask those questions? But another piece that we can do as ESPs is just hearing from what she had to speak about is, can we get involved at higher levels, either within our local, through our CBAs, to make sure that we have proper wording? Can we show up at school board meetings and talk about the wording behind school discipline and our rights and responsibilities? Can we get to be a part of committees at higher levels within our district that have discussions around these topics? So we have the ability to bring about change. Oh, thank you, Jessica. CBA is your collective bargaining agreement, so your contract, basically, if you're in a bargaining state. The other piece is, we're in a political realm right now. So can you get involved in working with electing officials that are pro-education, pro-student, pro-family voice, That's another place where you can bring about change. So I would love to invite you to type into the chat any answers to any of those three questions. Like, what are some things you can ponder on where your influence is, or how do you contribute to student relationships, or where can you bring about change? Betsy tries to stay positive. Building relationships with students and parents. Yes. Communicate observations, join district committees to advocate. Kathy says connecting with students, greeting the children day by day, speaking with students and advising. Mutual respect with students. Super, those are great answers. David says being consistent. Linda says bond. Regina says being supportive. And I think, you know, here in Washington State, we, part of an NEA grant that we received, we worked alongside the University of Washington and did a study where we talked to families, educators, and students across the state. And out of that, this was prior to 2020 when we did this study, so in 2019, and out of that study, we came up with these results that the number one thing students told us was to see us. And the number two thing that they said to us was make our education relevant. And number three was help us see each other. So our biggest realm of influence as an ESP is to see our students and to see them where they're at. And it's really important. And that's where we're kind of the wind beneath the wings, right? Some of us are there in the classroom, whispering in the student's ear, like, don't forget to pull out your pencil. And we're preventing some of these behaviors, because if we can remember that all behavior is a form of communication, then we can see our students where they're at and realize that, see their humanity in the process. Next slide. The Intercultural Developmental Research Association came up with this definition for equitable discipline. It's administrators as school leaders set the tone and articulate the plan for discipline in a school. To be equitable, discipline plans have to be fair, consistently enforced, developmentally appropriate, sensitive to student and adult needs, and must prioritize safety. Meaningful discipline systems are proactive rather than reactive. I think we can walk onto a campus and get a feel of the campus within the first 5 minutes. When you walk just down the hallway of a school, when it's working, we can get a feel of how the classrooms are going and what's going on in those buildings. We, prior to the pandemic, when we left and had our shutdown, and we had conversations and a lot of times for professional development. And in those conversations, we knew that when we returned into buildings, we were going to be different as people, as educators, and that our students were going to return to building different. And we did an extreme disservice to our students, because what we did was we returned to building business as usual. We didn't change anything. And we forgot that our students were returning deficient in some ways, but had great growth in other realms. So across the nation over the last year and 2 years, we've seen behaviors in ways that we never saw prior to the pandemic. And we are frantically trying to be reactive and not pausing and being proactive in the long run. So if equitable discipline is done correctly, it's consistently enforced. I saw somebody put that in the chat. You have to be consistent. It's developmentally appropriate, and we're sensitive to the student and the adult needs. Next slide. So what's all that framework that we need to increase equity in school discipline? So we have to have, and what I'm hearing a lot of you say in the chat and type in, is we have to have supportive relationships. we need to remember that we as ESP see the students oftentimes in a different light than the teachers and the certificated staff that are working with them as well, right? And so supportive relationships is a key piece. We have to have bias-aware classrooms and respectful environments. It should not be a power struggle within buildings. It should be respectful. We have to have academic rigor. We cannot, we need to continuously challenge our students and not demote them for behaviors, but continually challenge their minds as well. We have to have culturally relevant and responsive teaching for our students to make sure that they know what they're learning is relevant in their lives, and that we as educators see them where they're at. Next slide. We have to have data-based inquiry for equity. And so when I say data-based inquiry, it's we're looking at all pieces when we are working on our discipline. We're looking at discipline. We're looking at the numbers in discipline for our Black and Brown students. We're looking at the numbers in discipline for our differently abled students. We're looking at the race behind all of the discipline policies. And we're also looking at socioeconomic pieces as well, because that's really important when we're making those decisions around the policies and the practices we're putting into place. We have to have problem-solving approaches to discipline. It can't be that zero tolerance stuff. It has to be understanding and seeing our students where they're at, and understanding and realizing that no two students' discipline may be the same. And it's because we've done restorative justice in the proper way to make sure that that the community in which the behavior happened is supported and structured appropriately. We have to have that inclusion of student and family voice to conflicts, causes, and solutions. So we need to make sure that families get to have input, students get to have input, and it's not just an authoritative person making these decisions in the behavioral situations. And then this is a piece that often gets lost too. We need to make sure we're purposeful about the reintegration of the students after the conflict happened, or if it is an extreme case and a student has to be removed from the learning environment, how are we inviting that student back in a welcoming way? How are we showing them that they did what we asked of them to do for their behavior, and now it's a clean slate? You're welcome back. We're all good. And how do we support those students when we re-enter them back into our systems? And then that multi-tiered systems of supports, that kind of that PBIS mindset of making sure, understanding that there's multiple tiers and certain students sit on certain tiers, and how are we supporting them appropriately for academic success and for community success as a whole. So there's a lot of pieces that are parts of the framework to increase equity in school discipline. Next slide. Some questions to consider for you as you walk away from this training tonight, with your local or your building teams, or people that you're having these discussions with are, what discipline systems is your district currently implementing? And then what are your hopes, or what are some things that you would love to see your district start to implement? And just basically thinking about what is the outcome for students if we don't restructure discipline. I can honestly say from my realm of being a campus supervisor at a high school that I saw through the relationships I built with students in-school suspension, I saw the educational trajectory of some of those students drastically change. I have a student that's going to college over there on the East Coast now, who the building prior to me arriving had written him off. And I had educators make statements to me, and that he was going to get locked up and that we would never see him in our building the following school year. And in that, he just graduated, as a matter of fact, last year. And he was the student of the year in that graduating class. And so if we can see our students where they're at, have conversation and show them that they're amazing. My mantra is all students are capable of success, no exceptions. I think that it would really change across the nation what we're doing with students and how we're reacting to our students and their behaviors. Next slide. So where do we go from here? I think this is a great question for you guys to be able to type into the chat now. What are some immediate actions that you personally can do after receiving some of the information I've spewed at you all night long? Betsy Bryan said we can implement into the classroom. Tia says being a patient listener and prioritizing student needs. Stephen said building having a building leadership team. Yep. Robin, being able to take a student into a quiet room so they can sit and talk and de-escalate with an educator present is it's huge. Stephanie says keep a positive impact on all children. Patricia said don't be closed-minded. Understanding the student's perspective is extremely important. Marlene says our school seems to have the wrong idea of PBIS. Well, good. Maybe you can come back and say, can we revisit this? I think, at the end of the day, the biggest piece of all of us is we are not just a ESP, we are education support professionals. And our why for being in the roles that we are varies amongst each and every one of us, but you do have a realm of influence. You do have the ability to see students where they're at, and you get to be a presence, and you can be a life-changing presence for some of the students that you work with. So like I said, we can go super deep on this topic, but we really only had about an hour to go over this, but I appreciate you all being here tonight and touching on this. And then we're going to open it up for some Q&A in a little bit, but thank you all for coming tonight. My email is nliam@washingtonea.org, and I'm open to any questions that you guys want to email me or contact me about. And I appreciate you spending time with me this evening. So now we're, Crystal, to you now.
Thank you so much, Nani, for your presentation. So we are going to officially move into our Q&A portion of the session this evening. We will address the questions in the order in which they've been received until we run out of time. Again, those questions should be posted in the Q&A feature that we mentioned earlier on. And if you have posted questions in the chat, please just repost them real quickly for us in the Q&A feature so that we can quickly identify them. And if we don't get time to answer them live, we will make sure that we have follow-up communication for anything that's remaining. So Crystal, you are on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Nani, for such a wonderful presentation and fruitful information this evening. So our first question is, can discipline be any different for students with trauma and/or ACEs, or would making it different from others do them a disservice?
So for those of you who don't understand what ACEs are, it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I don't have them all listed or off the top of my head, but I would encourage you, there's a movie called Paper Tigers, and I would encourage you to look that up, or just to look up what ACEs stand for. But students that are affected by ACEs, and understanding that in restorative justice, not all discipline is going to be the same is important. Our students that are affected by ACEs need to be seen and need to be acknowledged for those ACEs that they have. And we need to show up and be consistent with those students, because the systems and a lot of people in their lives have let them down in more ways than one. And so if we are honoring those students and truly seeing them for who they are, we are consistent with them. We are going out of our way to show them that we see them. And when they do have behaviors, we're sitting down, seeing them where they're at, and we're deciding what's a way for them to give back to the system. And I want to give you an example, a really quick example of what a restorative justice piece would look like. 2 students fighting in the bathroom, kind of a bloody fight that happens. Students get brought down. Everybody gets de-escalated. You have a conversation. You're sitting at a round table. The students get to kind of have a conversation once everyone is de-escalated, and we say, here's how your behavior has affected the community. And let's say the result after the conversation comes out is they need to give back to the custodian because they caused a lot of harm in the bathroom. And how are they going to do that? They're going to go out and they're going to help the custodian after school every day for 30 minutes, or take part of their recess time to pick up trash around campus with the custodian, so they can get to know the custodian and know how their actions have affected the community. And then we're working on making sure that their relationship is repaired, and any relationships that were harmed due to their actions are repaired. So that's kind of a quick little snippet on what that looks like. So it's not going to do a disservice. It's only going to do a student a disservice if we don't hold them accountable for their actions. What other people think equitable punishment should look like is very different when you're doing restorative justice. I guess Eric is the best way to answer that.
Thank you, Nani.
Yeah.
Our next question: do you have any examples of helpful and non-harmful CBA language?
I think it all depends on, when we're talking about our collective bargaining agreement language, it's what are you needing in that language when it comes to this topic, which is equitable discipline, and the involvement that your ESP group has when it comes to those topics, right? So I can follow up with you, Rachel. I'll get your contact information and I can get you those examples off grid. How's that sound?
Thank you. And our next question: how do I work with my student when his parents want to be supportive, but don't know how to be more than friends?
Woo-hoo, Mary. So parents are an interesting piece, right? I told you I came from the security realm. So oftentimes when we contact parents, and this is no fault of being a parent, I raised 3 fabulous, wonderful adults that I've released out into the world. But we want to see the good in our kids. And sometimes it's very hard for even parents to hold their children accountable. And we can't tell a parent how to parent. Sometimes our kiddos will come off the bus and they'll come into our realm, and what's appropriate at their home is not appropriate on our campus. And so you have to have those conversations, and we can't tell the parents what they should be doing in their homes, but we can support those parents and give them some structures if they ask for them. We just can't tell them what to do. So that can be challenging, and even there's so many layers to that, Mary.
And our last question this evening: how would you, I guess, recommend discipline for a student who has, I believe, autism?
Well, it all depends on the age and their ability of understanding. right? Sometimes when we have nonverbal students who have this diagnosis, they're trying to communicate through their behavior, they're trying to communicate something to us, and we have to crack that code. There are some families who allow behaviors at their home that just are not acceptable in a school building. We don't have naked time ever at any school. And so sometimes we do have to have those conversations with parents about at what time is this going to be socially unacceptable. And we have to have pieces around that. If we have a student who's hitting and we're taking them into the cafeteria, we don't let them hit and then look at the kid who's just been harmed and say, sorry. How are we supporting them appropriately so those behaviors aren't causing damage or harm to their environment and their community? And then what are we doing to teach our students with autism how to be acceptable in the communities that they work in? I think it's when we talk about social skills for our students as they continue to get older, it becomes really challenging that they do social skills with other students with autism. And then they come into our buildings and they try and utilize those skills with typical students, and they don't get the answer that they just learned in their social skills class. So how are we welcoming our students with autism into communities, and how are we supporting them appropriately so their behaviors aren't affecting others, I guess is a deeper question.
Well, thank you, Nani. And
Yeah.
for any remaining questions, we'll make sure that we get those to Nani and get a response to you in the near future. And so that will conclude our Q&A portion of the webinar. And thank you so much for all of your active participation. We also want to remind you that as we continue to think about equity in education, we don't want to forget the importance of supporting pro-public education candidates. And so here on our education vote slide, we have 4 ways that you can take action. You can be an activist, you can volunteer, you can donate, or you can even vote and share. So please visit the 4 QR codes on the slide for more information. And as Nani mentioned, participating in our local, state, and national elections is one way that we can support students and help our public education system move towards policies and regulations that are more student first and equitable. And so now we'll pass it back to Jessica.
To request a general session-specific certificate of completion as a participant of a recorded session, please send your request by email to espqweb@nea.org. All requests must include the session title and the on-screen certificate of completion code. Session certificates will not be provided if your viewer code is not included in the email request. Note, due to limitations in our ability to track attendance for recorded sessions, personalized certificates can only be provided for participants of live webinars whose attendance can be verified. The certificate received for viewing recorded sessions will be session specific, but will not include personalized names. On behalf of the Center for Professional Excellence in Student Learning's NEA ESP Quality Department, I would like to thank you for participating in tonight's webinar, thank our presenter, Nani, for her presentation, and encourage you to attend our future NEA ESP Learning Network professional development opportunities. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and good night from the NEA ESP Quality Department.